Hello students, welcome in our English lecture. Today we are going to learn from unit number 9.1, class 8, a great stone face, part 1. So students, in this story, that author told about a great stone face. So what is the story behind it? That we will see in this lesson. But first of all, we will see about the author who is written that story. This story is written by the Nathaniel Hawthorne, who is an American novelist. He is born on 4 July 1804 and he died on 19 May 1864. He was an American novelist, dark romantic and short story writer. His work often focused on history, mortality and religion. So we will know more about him. So he was born in 1804 in the Salem, Massachusetts to Nathaniel Hawthorne and the former Elizabeth Clark Manning. His ancestors include John Hawthorne, the only judge from the Salem witch trials, who never repeated his involvement. He entered the Bowdoin College in the 1821, was elected to Phi Beta Kappa in 1824 and graduated in 1825. He published his first work in 1828, the novel Fanshawe. He later tried to suppress it, feeling that it was not equal to the standard of his later work. He published several short stories also. In the periodicals which he collected in the 1837 as Twice Told Tales, the next year he became engaged to Sophia Peabody. He worked at the Boston Custom House and joined Book Farm, a transcendentalist community. Before marrying Peabody in 1842, the couple moved to the Old Manse in the Concord, Massachusetts, later moving to the Salem, the Berkshires, then to the Wayside in Concord. The Scarlet Letter was published in Concord. The Scarlet Letter was published in the 1850, followed by a succession of other novels. A political appointment of consul took Hawthorne and family to Europe before their return to Concord in the 1860. Hawthorne died on May. So much of writings of Hawthorne writing centers on New England, many book works featuring moral metaphors with an anti-Puritan inspiration. His fiction works are considered part of the Romantic movement and more specifically dark romanticism. His themes often center on the inherent evil and sin of humanity, and his works often have a moral message and deep psychological complexity. His published works include novels, short stories, and a biography of his college friends, Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States. The Great Stone Face is a short story published by Nathaniel Hawthorne in the 1850. So the story reappeared in the full-length book, The Snow Image and Other Twice Told Tales, published by the Ticknor Reed and Fields. in 1852. It has since been republished and anthologised many times. Now here we took the introduction of author, how he written the books. Now we will start the reading and explanation of lesson. The Great Stone Face, Part 1 by the Nathaniel Hawthorne. One afternoon, when the sun was going down, a mother and a child, little boy, sat at the door of the cottage, talking about the great stone face. They had only to lift the eyes, and there it was, plain to be seen, though miles away, with the sunshine brightening all its features. And what was the great stone face? The great stone face was a work of nature, formed on the perpendicular side of a mountain by some immense rocks which had been thrown together, so that when viewed at a proper distance they resembled the features of a human face. If the spectator approached too near, he would lost the outline of the enormous face and could see only a heap of gigantic rocks piled on one upon another. But seen from a distance, the clouds clustering about it, the great stone face seemed positively to be alive. It was the belief of many people that the valley held much of its fertility to the benign face that was continually beaming over in the mother and little boy. As we said earlier, sat at the door of the cottage, gazing at the great stone face and talking about it. The child's name was Ernest. Mother said he, while the great stone face smiled on him. I wish that it could speak, where it looks so very kindly that its voice must indeed be pleasant. If I ever see a man with such a face, I should love him very much. If an old prophecy should be come to pass, answered his mother, we may see a man sometime with exactly such a face as that. What prophecy do you mean? Dear mother, eagerly inquired Ernest. Please tell me about it. So his mother told him a story that her own mother had told her when she herself was younger than little Ernest. That at some features day a child should be born near here. It was designed to become the greatest and noblest person of this time, and whose face in the manhood should be an exact resemblance to the great stone face. Many still had faith in this old prophecy, but others took it to be nothing but ideal at all. All events the great man of the prophecy and not yet appeared. O mother, cried Ernest, clapping his hands above his head. I do hope that I shall live to see him. His mother was an affectionate and thoughtful woman. It was proper, she thought, not to discourage the fanciful hopes of little boy. So she said to him, perhaps you may, and Ernest never forgot the story that his mother told him. It was always his mind whenever he looked up at the great stone face. He spent his childhood in the log cottage where he was born, was dutiful to his mother and helpful to her many things, assisting her much with his little hands and more with his loving heart. In this manner, from a happy yet often pensive child, he grew up to be a mild and quiet youth. Ernest had no teacher, but the great stone face became one to him. When the work of the day was over, he would gaze at it for hours until he began to imagine that those vast features recognized him and gave him a smile of kindness and encouragement. About this time, there went a real one throughout the valley, that the great man who was to be a resemblance to the great stone face had appeared at last. It seems that many years before, a young man had left the valley and settled at a distance seaport, Gathergold, which was his name, had set up aqua and being sharp in the business matters. That business matters had become so very rich that it would have taken him 100 years only to count his wealth. In time, he thought of his native valley and decided to go back there and end his days where he had been born. Ernest had been deeply stirred by the idea that the great man, the nobleman, the manner of prophecy, after so many ages of delay, was at length to be seen in his native valley. Excuse me, to be seen in his native valley. While the boy was still gazing up the valley one day and imagining that the great stone face returned his gaze, the noise of wheels was heard and a crowd of people cried, "Here comes the great Mr. Gathergold." A carriage drawn by 4 horses dashed round of the turn of the road. Within it, thrust partly out of the window, appeared the face of him with yellow skin, the very image of great stone face, shouted the people. Sure enough, the old prophecy is true here. We have the great man at last, and what greatly puzzled Ernest. They seemed actually to believe that there was the likeness which they spoke of. He turned away sadly from the wrinkled signers of that unpleasant face and gazed up the valley where the stone face seemed to say, "He will come, fear not, Ernest, the man will come." The years went on, and Ernest grew to be a young man. He attracted little notice from the inhabitants of the valley. They saw nothing remarkable in his way of life, except that when the labor of the day was over, he still loved to gaze upon the great stone face. The idea was that this was a phony, but pardonable because Ernest was industrious, kind, enabling. They did not know that the great stone face had become a teacher to him, and that the sentiment which was expressed in it would enlarge the young man's heart and fill it with deepest sympathies and other hearts. They did not know that from this excuse. Excuse me, they did not know that from this word come better a wisdom that could be learned from books. Neither did Ernest know that the thought which came to him so naturally in the fields and at the fireside were of a higher tone than those all men shared with him. A simple soul, simple as when his mother first told him the old story. He beheld the marvelous face looking down the valley and still wondered why its human likeness was so long and coming by this time. Poor Mr. Gadigal was dead and buried his wealth, which was the body of spirit of his existence, and disappeared and before his death. Since the melting away of his gold, it had been generally agreed that there was no great likeness after all between the renewed merchant and the majestic face upon the mountain it. It so happened that another son of the valley had became a soldier many years before. After a great deal of hard fighting, he was now a famous commander. He was known on the battlefield by the name of Blood Thunder and Old. And tired now, he had lately expressed a desire to return his native valley. The inhabitants, his old neighbors, and the grown up child prepared to welcome the renowned commander. It was being said that at last the likeness of great stone face had actually appeared great. Therefore was the excitement throughout the valley, and many people who had never once thought of glancing at a great stone face now spent much of time in engaging at it for the sake of knowing exactly how general blood and thunder look. On the day of the generals arrive Ernest and all other people of the valley left the proceed to spot where a great banquet had been prepared. Savages, student guard flags waved, and the crowd roared. Ernest was standing for too far back to see blood and thunder's face. However, he could hear several voices. "It is the same face exactly," cried one man, dancing for joy. "Wonderfully like it, that's a fact," replied another. "And why not?" cried a third's eyes. The greatest man of these or other age beyond a doubt. Ernest at last could see the general's face, and in the same glance to the side, he could also see the great stone face. If there was such a likeness as crowd proclaimed, Ernest could not recognize it. Fear not, I said his heart, as if the great stone face was whispering to him, "Fear not, Ernest. He will come." So students, we learn this story. But what is the conclusion of the great stone face part 1? So in this chapter, the great stone face part 1, that is illustrating to the students about the Ernest's adorous search to find out the man who would return to the valley one day, and it is resemble the great stone face. So thank you students, happy learning.